I did speak to a few people when I was sort of working out what questions to ask. This was an interesting one. Should builders be required to provide a 50-year flood insurance policy for all new properties?
No. I don't see how they could. Builders cannot protect buildings from extraordinary events. I think it's the planners who have to try and take ownership of the decision as to whether to build a building in a particular site is going to cause flooding issues. And the Environment Agency's modelling basically gives them a risk assessment, and I think, if there's more than a 1 in a million chance of that property getting flooded, then they are obliged to say no to the applicant for planning permission. I think that's roughly how it works. The trouble is that what we've seen over the last 3 or 4 years is a series of extraordinary events that no one could have predicted, that were outside the Environment Agency's models, and result in a lot of people's houses getting flooded. And as a result, they're finding it hard to get insurance to carry on living there against flooding, which is their single biggest risk. So this is a real problem. And I'm not quite sure in my own mind, I'm still not quite sure, whether the 2007 floods were part of a general global warming, or whether it was a one-off, extraordinary combination of natural forces that resulted in a large amount of water being dumped on and around Gloucester at one period of sort of 24 hours, that the likelihood of that happening again is so remote that we shouldn't even think about it. I just don't know. I don't think anyone has the answer. But I am sure that builders can't provide that insurance. They would go bankrupt, and most of them are close to bankruptcy already.
I can give you some... I'll edit this out, but I think it might be quite interesting background to the question.
Yeah, do. I probably went around the wrong track.
Because basically it was somebody who knows about planning law. And he said one of the biggest problems they've got in all floodplain environments is the locals and the planners know that there are big areas that should not be built on. But the big housing companies basically use the legal procedures to bully the planners into allowing them to build where the planners don't want building to take place. Because once the buildings are up and the builders sold them, it's not their problem anymore. And so he was saying the beauty about the insurance industry is that if you lay down a risk, the insurance industry will come along and put numbers on it. And you're right, the builders would no longer be able to afford to build anywhere where the insurance company said, well, hang on a minute. So it wasn't about the builders actually ever providing the insurance, it was about using the market to reinforce the decisions that the planners are trying to take, but in floodplain areas with shortages of building land, they get bullied.
Well, that's very interesting, but there is another way of approaching that.
Gloucester and Tewkesbury are actually quite tough on it, but some of the other towns
are less so.
They've not had enough recent floods to be able to say, look, guys.
That's very interesting. I mean, there is another way of approaching the whole flooding thing, which is, at the moment, the whole business of planning the numbers of houses for Gloucester, indeed anywhere, are all dictated by these regional strategies. And if you take the one for Gloucestershire, the bias in the regional strategy is to build all these new houses on the edges of Gloucester and Cheltenham. They don't want to build them in the rural areas, which they don't regard as, quote, sustainable, unquote. I've never understood this. I don't buy into it at all. We should be building around the villages, where you've got small schools in the villages in Gloucestershire with anything between 12 and 45 people. Those are uneconomic. And the only way to make them work, to make them sustainable, is actually to build more houses close by so there are more children who go and use the school. And otherwise you're in a constant game of winding down the countryside, closing down the schools so less people want to live there and all the rest of it. And then you just dump all the housing around the edge of Gloucester, which is what we've seen in Quedgeley and Huntsgrove and all the rest of it. It's totally, totally wrong. We should be focusing on brownfield sites in the city. And then you wouldn't really have these issues, because you wouldn't be needing to build on the floodplains around the city and Cheltenham and Tewkesbury, which, as you say, the farmers have known for years are not places where you should be building. So I think if you got rid of the regional strategy, allowed the city to decide where it wants to build, don't give it a target, let the city just work out how many houses that it can provide sensibly, then I think you're going to have much less of this implicit pressure on councils to give planning permission for things which they shouldn't really be giving them for.